Starmer has announced his reset, which must not be called that, but something else. For what is in a name, that which we call a reset, by any other name would smell as sweet. Well, it's been merely 5 months of his premiership, and it is already clear he has fated to be one of the worst leaders in modern British history. He has no ideas, no originality, and no inspiration. But at least he has his amazing charisma.
3, 2, 1... Yay! It worked! Nervous moment there.
Is there a more boring way of pronouncing the word three? Well, if there is...
...to the votes of the 7,000 people who voted for reform in North East Somerset. I had to win their votes. And I had to win their votes wearing a blue rosette and supporting a Conservative government that had simply failed to do Conservative things. That is not Nigel Farage's fault. That is, to some degree, my fault. And the fault in others within the Conservative Party.
Sadiq Khan, it is being reported, may be on the New Year's honours list and in line for a knighthood for his work in political and public services. You're having a laugh. Sadiq Khan, the man who has presided over record knife crime on London streets, a place where women and girls feel unsafe because of the huge rise in the spate of attacks against them. Under his watch, a place where many tourists won't wear one on a night out in case they get robbed. A city where even he admits to feeling unsafe. He says that's because he's Muslim. What he's missed is that we're all afraid in the mess that, in my view, he's allowed our once great capital to become. He expanded the ULEZ zone and tried to influence the reporting of just how bad the...
He supports tougher punishments for people that are convicted of having these indecent images. I'll tell you again, 80% of those convicted for possessing these indecent images of children are avoiding prison. I think that is such a shame. It's a stain on our society. If we don't stand up for and protect the most vulnerable people in our society, our children, our babies, then what on earth is our society coming to?
Said that this is now a matter of national security.
Nigel Farage with his customary inflammatory language there at a Reform UK press conference. He declined to stand for a seat.
Wow. His customary inflammatory language, Robert. I mean, it doesn't get... If you want a dictionary definition of bias, there it is right there, from a live broadcasting BBC newsreader.
Can you imagine if Talk TV had done something like that?
Yeah.
Or GB News or anyone, everyone has said, take them off the air, this is outrageous. But if the Beeb does it, it's apparently OK. Well, I'm glad we've got an apology. That at least is a step forward.
I bet you I get a load of stick for being here at 7 o'clock. Why? Because this afternoon we have a debate on the Tobacco and Vapes Bill, second reading. Oh, believe you me, the Cromwellians are fully in charge. I listened to speaker after speaker saying they would support the legislation. You know the one that Rishi first talked about. Anybody born after 2009 won't be able to buy cigarettes, but a year earlier they will. And the reason I'm not voting at 7 o'clock is because it's going to pass with a majority of about 300, I think. And I think I'm better off here debating national issues on GB News in a situation like that. So those of you from the Daily Mirror who want to write rude things, at least I've given you some words that you can publish.
That it's scrapping work to convert a former East Sussex prison into a migrant camp. The Home Office spent £15 million buying the derelict North Ice site in Bexhill-on-Sea amid political pressure to stop housing migrants in hotels. A recent report by Whitehall's spending watchdog, the National Audit Office, said the site was contaminated with asbestos and that the Home Office cut corners, adding the government has paid more than it needed to in its haste to acquire the site, but it was ultimately deemed unfit for its intended purpose due to contamination.
In Scotland, the police had put up advertisements in the tube encouraging people to turn people in for offensive behavior online. It seems to me, for example, if you're concerned about knife crime, then maybe one of the things you don't want to do is have your police investigating offensive speech. And one of the things I do see happening in the UK as an outsider that's really quite terrifying to me is that there are increasing restrictions put on people's ability to speak forthrightly, and that the consequence of that restriction And the criminalization of what hypothetically constitutes offensive speech is going to be a cure that's so much more worse than the disease that we can hardly imagine it. I know.
If you're in the UK, you embrace our values of freedom, liberty and democracy, or you practice what you preach and go and live somewhere where the things you want are being practiced already. Everyone and anyone who asks for this, well, it's time for mass deportations. If you don't align with the values of the United Kingdom, well, clear out, go and live somewhere where...
Oh, strong talk, Andy. What do you think of that?
It's ridiculous.
Why?
If you don't align with the values, then you can be deported. That's an authoritarian suggestion. That's absolutely ridiculous.
Verify, backing up his facts about how many small farms would be affected by inheritance tax, which is completely at odds with what many other economists think. Now we learn that the expert at the BBC, and you might have heard of this fella, Dan Needle, has been around for a couple of years. Independent tax expert. Oh, no, he's not. It turns out he's been a member of the Labour Party for 35 years, and he is an activist. Independent tax expert. I should cocoa. It's all nonsense. It shows that the BBC, frankly, over the farming issue, have not played with a straight bat.
Coming for a long time, and it wasn't an easy decision. In many ways, I was sad yesterday because when you're part of a political party as long as I was, 36 years, it makes me feel old. That's one of the things, is you're leaving behind friends as well, really important relationships. And so there are plenty of times, my sort of pen hovered over the decision to defect and I pulled back. But the final straw for me really was last Thursday's immigration numbers.
Yeah.
How many times, Bev, you sat with us, Tory, and over the last few years, and they said they were controlling immigration.
Yeah.
And then we learned last Thursday, actually, immigration had hit record levels. And it wasn't the channel crossings. It wasn't things beyond the Conservative ministers' control. It was actually within ministers' ability to control those numbers, and they let immigration out of control. And it was, for me, the final deceit.
Obviously, Bashar al-Assad has gone, fled the country with his family, gone to Russia with only his £2 billion fortune for solace. He's actually moved into this massive luxury block of flats, and he won't have a mortgage problem because he owns the block of flats. So we don't have to worry about Assad starving, but he's definitely gone. They're ransacking his palace. These various ragtag rebels have taken power, and probably we are now in more trouble than when Assad was in power. He's gone now. Russell, we're going to talk about why Labour have for so long tried to keep him in power. But you've got a list of some of his more attractive achievements.
I was inspired by this outrageous tweet from John Simpson, of course, ex-BBC today, that said...
Well, no, he's not ex-BBC.
In recent weeks, the Reform Party has not only seen defections from former Tory MP Andrew Jenkins and former Tory strategist Tim Montgomery, but today it emerged the property tycoon and billionaire Nick Candy defected from the Tories to Reform too, becoming its treasurer. And of course, all this comes as Reform has overtaken the Labour Party in the polls, firmly in second place behind the Tories. The vote in a two-party system is split three ways. Today, a new poll for Conservative Home has shown 7 in 10 Conservative Party members think Reform poses the biggest challenge to the Tories at the next election. Well, Vox Populi Vox Dei, the voice of the people is the voice of God, and the people, as so often, are right. Reform poses a serious conundrum for the Tory party. With a mere 121 seats in the House of Commons, the Conservatives cannot afford to have a split right-of-centre vote at the next election. Yet this need not be so. Most Tory party members share the concerns and values of those in Reform. There was a failure to govern as Conservatives, which Kemi Badenoch has admitted to. So, to win back voters, the Tory party, lo and behold, needs to be Conservative again. This could open the way for some form of cooperation between the two parties. If each fights the other, then the left could win, and the first 5 months of a Labour government show quite how undesirable that is. Reform will not want to do a deal with the soggy left-leaning establishment Tory party that accepts the status quo. If it does a deal with anyone, it will be with a party that stands up for our shared Conservative values. Fundamentally, the ambitions of the two parties are the same. Both parties want dramatically to decrease migration, to exercise our newfound sovereignty in a post-Brexit Britain, to align more closely with the US over the EU, to cut the size of the state, reduce taxes, and unleash our latent growth. If the two parties remain divided, the danger of the Labour supermajority remains. But if we work together, according to current polling, the Reverend Keir Starmer's Labour Party could be destroyed in
What these tax changes do is they mean inevitably very large numbers of farms will leave the families that have looked after them, be sold off, undoubtedly, to giant American corporations who will probably put solar on half of it, and on the other half, probably introduce kinds of agricultural practices that are so intensive that many of us will find it repulsive. So it matters at every level. I've never in my adult life known a Treasury forecast that was right about anything, let alone this. They always get it wrong. The sums are wrong. They haven't thought it through. And by the way, this is not just farms. It's small family businesses being affected as well. It's just that this is more visual with tractors. It's a massive assault on the private sector. But in particular, this is really a battle of global corporates who will benefit out of this as against the little man and little woman. And I'm really pleased not only that tractors are here, but they're in Scotland, they're in Wales, they're in Yorkshire. And remember this, Labour have got approximately 100 members of Parliament who are now representing rural or at least semi-rural constituencies. These kind of protests need to be, by the way, peaceful, obviously, but need to be in every market town in England. And we need to get the great British public behind small businesses, behind our farmers. And you know what? Fear of losing the next election. And let's face it, Starmer's not off to a great start, is he really? I think this world of rural England, of farming, and let's not forget our fishing communities as well, I think this current group of MPs are more disconnected from that world than they've ever been at any time since Parliament sat 800 years ago. They have no comprehension. We have a politics that is dominated by a huge urban majority, no comprehension of what food is or where it comes from, no understanding of why the English countryside of them is somewhere they drive through and think it's muddy and a bit wet. Well, and so there is a real disconnect that is going on. But I believe that there is a silent majority of people in Britain who really do understand this. And you know what? If Labour think they're going to lose those 100 seats, we will get a change.
Now, I learned something new today, everybody. It's perfectly acceptable to identify as a cat. You what? Don't you dare mock it, by the way, because I've decided that is now what I am, meow shell to you. But if you do indeed mock it, careful, because I wouldn't be surprised if it could be considered a hate crime. Self-identity, where do we draw the line? Kids at school being told that they must respect it if this is how their peers seriously want to present themselves. Really? What on earth is going on in our schools? How worried about it should we be? And why are parents not allowed to see the content that children are being taught? Very alarming, if you ask me.
Common with the last government, there is a target to build 1.5 million homes during the lifetime of this Parliament. It's just that Labour seem to be rather more determined to do it because they are quite prepared to totally override local district, county councils, local unitary authorities. They are just going to do it. And this includes redefinitions of what counts as green belt land. Some of it potentially being designated as being grey belt. Now, if this comes to disused garages or empty car parks or vacant pubs, well, you might say that all makes sense. But there will be, especially across the home counties, real, genuine worry about what it means for green spaces, about what it means for gaps in between villages. And by the way, when all these houses get built, there'll be no more GPs, no more school places, no more roads, no, your quality of life will diminish directly as a result of this. Now, whether they can actually meet the target, I very much doubt, without importing huge amounts of foreign labour, which of course in turn will mean even more demand for houses. Right now, we have to provide one new home every 2 minutes just to keep pace with levels of immigration in this country. So the truth of it is, we must build over greenbelt land all over our nation just to house those that have come into this country in the course of the last 10 years. Well,
out, and we found out that under the Tories, over the last year, we've seen net migration hit almost a million. Almost a million. This country cannot handle those numbers. Now, I'm somebody that's from a North African background. I think that immigration is generally quite good for the country. It's good for the economy when it's the right kinds of people and when it's people that are actually incentivized to work. Unfortunately, the current system incentivizes people to get lost in the benefit system, get lost into effectively being reliant on taxpayer money, and it's so unfair. How is it that we have hardworking,
might be the word at the prospect of seeing the Epstein client list or the Diddy tapes. Do you think those will see the light of day in any meaningful way?
What's happened over the last 8 years is that there have been a lot of investigations where the main obstacles have been government officials. Doing something like a government-scale Twitter files would win hearts and minds at a level that would be tough for anybody to compete with. Everywhere else in the world, the kind of official censorship movement is already in full swing.
To me, something crystallised with the Hunter Biden pardon. They seem to be being told, well, the rule of law applies when we say it applies, and it applies differently to you than it applies to us.
That's just sort of openly admitting to even your own voters. We'll lie when it suits us, or when we say things you can expect that we're saying them for political reasons, and also to cut off access to the information that might make them less trustful.